And
Yeah.
so I can't like answer a text in the middle of this.
Yeah. All right. That's fine.
If I see, it's all good. It doesn't matter.
All right. We're up on YouTube, but that doesn't
So
mean a whole. That's fine. It's not like anybody got a
fix this.
notification or anything. Oh, what am I
Fix
doing?
this because I look weird. Oh, there we go. Oh, see you tighten it.
Okay. Gosh.
It's not. It's I've texted Joy myself on this one. Yep.
All right. Are you ready, Mayor?
Huh?
All right. Yeah, Steve, we're ready. All right. Steve sending the push, and then we'll be good to go.
Let me get mine.
What's that? Yeah, I haven't put the camera on me yet. All right. Thank you. Hey folks, welcome into the News 12 Now Desk. Thanks for joining us here on this Monday, April 17th. Hope you all had a great weekend and a good start to your week here. We've got some beautiful weather outside, so that's always a plus. We are joined this morning by Meredith Anderson on the road right now, live somewhere along I-20. I assume you're still out that way, Meredith, as we bring her in here. We are talking about, if you missed what we've talked about last week or this morning, Meredith is right now on the way to Washington, D.C. for a big meeting between Senator Jon Ossoff, the Army, and some families who are living on Fort Gordon, have lived on Fort Gordon, who are just dealing with some unlivable housing. That's really the only way to describe it. Mold issues, plumbing issues, all sorts of stuff that Meredith has been uncovering over the last 10 plus years when it comes to housing out there. So Meredith, I'll kind of let you take it away with what you're doing and kind of what this meeting is as you guys are heading up there.
Well, first, I want to kind of give everyone an idea of our safety situation. I am not driving. Gary is driving. All right. He has his eyes on the road. I have a phone mount on the car, but when the mount's turned around like this, when the camera's turned around, sometimes it can be deceiving. I'm not driving, not driving, so I'm not distracted. We are in Virginia now, and our connoisseur of gas stations here, Gary. First, we stopped at a Buc-ee's along the way, and we had just stopped at a Wawa. So this is my tour of gas stations we don't have in our area on our way to Washington, D.C. But this is a very, very important meeting that we're going to tomorrow morning, and it's an oversight meeting. Senator Jon Ossoff is holding it 1 year almost to the day. I mean, we're just 7 days shy of when he held a hearing last year. Gary and I made that same trip. We're driving the same way up to this. And the hearing that he held last year was basically the culmination of an 8 month long investigation. He released the results of this very intense investigation that he did with the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. And this was a bipartisan effort, Republicans and Democrats working together to take a very deep dive into the privatized housing situation with our U.S. military. And for those of you who haven't been following along, obviously, when a family moves on, say, Fort Gordon, and they become tenants of a home on post, they they live on post, but the Army is not their landlord. A private company is their landlord. And in our situation, and in more than 50 other installations across the country, that private company is Balfour Beatty. Balfour Beatty is a British-based company, and they have been involved. They're one of the largest companies that's involved in this, but they have been involved in this since the 90s when the military got out of the business of being a landlord. And for 10 years now, we've uncovered major problems with homes that are owned and operated by Balfour Beatty communities. Senator Jon Ossoff, when he became chair of the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, dove into exactly what's been happening in these homes. And he picked a specific time period. He picked the time period after Balfour Beatty pleaded guilty to defrauding the U.S. government. And the company was convicted of doing this by inflating the work orders. They would say, we did this and we did this and we cleaned this up, when in fact they did not. And they were convicted of this, they were fined, and things were supposed to get better. And that is where Senator Ossoff started. And so he looked at this, and for 8 months, and the culmination of that was April of 2022. And during that hearing, we heard from a number of families, but the one that really stuck out the most was Captain Cho. He flew 7,000 miles from across the globe to testify under oath. And again, this is testimony under oath, penalty of perjury, to say what happened to his daughter, that she developed a life-threatening skin condition by living in some home on Fort Gordon. And it was a heartbreaking story. He testified that her skin was reptilian in nature, that she looked like a burn patient, that she was this outgoing child who really just became a shell of who she was. And her day depended on how her skin was going to be, that it was excruciating. She would wake up covered in blood. His testimony basically made her the poster child of what can happen in bad military housing, therefore putting Fort Gordon on the map. Fort Gordon on the map for so many good things, cybersecurity, NSA, and so now suddenly, Fort Gordon's in the national spotlight for this. This meeting, fast forward a year later, this oversight meeting tomorrow, this session, is going to be a chance for some of these military families, and these are not the same ones, these are different families, and they're going to sit down with Senator Ossoff and with some pretty high-ranking officials in the Army, specifically Rachel Jacobson. She is the Assistant Secretary for the Army of Installations, Environment, and Energy, and also Lieutenant General Kevin Marine. He is the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army for Installations. So these are two very important pieces to the puzzle. I mean, Rachel Jacobson is the one who went before Congress and said, look, when I heard what happened in that hearing that Senator Ossoff chaired, and I heard, what happened with Captain Cho's daughter, we immediately called for the Army to open its own independent investigation at Fort Gordon, to have Balfour Beatty suspend all of its bonuses that were happening at Fort Gordon. So Rachel Jacobson immediately sprung to action when all of this information came to light. So she is someone who has the authority and the power to do something. And so she is going to be in the room tomorrow with families from Fort Gordon who have experienced some problems. And we're going to hear a whole new set of issues. And I have been in touch with one of the families that's going to be there tomorrow. We're not going to get into their particular story now, but it's very compelling. And she's told her story to the I-Team, and it's just one of frustration. And it's one that shows the problems have only continued. And it's Senator Ossoff's mission to make sure that these problems, first of all, get brought to light, but that those with the authority to do something about it do something about it. And it also is going to go a long way too, to have these families sit in a room with these really important people in the Army, really high up the chain of command, and meet face to face. I mean, we all went through COVID where we felt so detached. We're far away from each other. We're not in the same room. Maybe we're talking on the phone. Or think about the Army going through a lot of these documents and looking at a lot of these cases. These families, unfortunately, because this is such a widespread problem, here's family A, family B, family C on a stack of papers. This gives them a chance at the top level to sit down with these families face to face and have human connection and just talk it out. And so they can, put a face, put a story, put a name to these documents that they've been looking at, to these stories that they've been hearing, and ask them questions, and really just kind of get a sense for how they're feeling. So this is important on a lot of levels. What's been very discouraging to me, and what's discouraging, I would imagine, I mean, I obviously can't speak for all the families, but the Balfour Beatty executives who were there during the hearing, they are not on the list of people who are going to be at this oversight session tomorrow. It is my understanding Balfour Beatty was invited to be there, and I would hope that they could be there too, because they're a very important part of this, and it's kind of a glaring vacancy that they're not going to be there. At least it seems now. Maybe that can change between now and tomorrow, but the last communication I saw, they were not on the list of those expected to be at tomorrow's meeting.
And you talked about people who can actually do something, and you mentioned, was it Rachel Jacobson? Yeah, Rachel Jacobson.
Rachel Jacobson.
Yeah, and Lieutenant General Vereen. I mean, you got these big name people, and really the group that can do everything to fix this is not going to be there. And I kind of want to go back to something we had talked about earlier in the day, and wanted to bring that back up. Is really at the end of the day, not all Balfour Beatty has to do, but like if Balfour Beatty just fixes the problems, everybody wins. This isn't like a get you meeting for Balfour Beatty.
Right.
This is a meeting just to help these families that are living through unlivable situations.
And this wasn't a surprise to Balfour Beatty either. This hearing that happened last year was no surprise to them. And this has been, in 2019 is really when all of this kind of came to a head. I mean, it was dubbed the housing crisis. There were reports not just of mold and things called life, health, safety issues that the Army dubbed life, health, safety, because that's what it affects, the family's life, health, and safety. But it wasn't just happening at Fort Gordon. We were uncovering things at Fort Gordon, but there were journalists on the ground in other communities uncovering a lot of the same in other installations, other bases, other posts all over the country as well. And not just Balfour Beatty. There's about a dozen other companies that are like Balfour Beatty that are also contractors, also private housing providers that kind of have the same arrangement that Balfour Beatty does. So all of these problems, they are not unique to Fort Gordon, and they all came to a head in 2019, and there was a congressional hearing about it, and a lot of the congressmen were outraged, and of course they were, because this was terrible to hear about children, who were sick, and parents who were sick, and just, the stress of being in the military and being deployed and not knowing, you're in an unsafe area, and then you think your family might be unsafe at home. And who would ever imagine that would have been a worry when you enlisted and moved your family on post? I had one military family member tell me, when you move on post, that's supposed to be like the nation's safest gated community, right? Like you would never think that would be a place where your family could get hurt or sick just because of where you live. So in 2019, when it all kind of hit a head, that's when things should have started getting better. There was a tenant bill of rights that was developed, and the companies were supposed to follow a new set of protocol. There were all the leases, for example, were supposed to be the same, and there was just a basic list of tenant rights. And I mean, we uncovered at Fort Gordon that a year after the tenant bill of rights went into effect, Balfour Beatty there were very important parts of that tenant bill of rights that had not been enacted at Fort Gordon yet. So there's all of these things that should have been happening along the way that just haven't been. So, I think a lot of times the families have been optimistic. Here's 2019. All right, finally, it's going to get fixed. Okay, finally, we're going to get a tenant bill of rights. Okay, finally. And then nothing happens, and things just don't end up getting fixed. And then these families feel like they're going to be, in trouble for speaking up, or, if you complain against your landlord, a lot of them are worried that they'll be moved into a place that's worse, or that there's going to be retaliation. And some families claim that there was retaliation and have provided some pretty compelling evidence that, yeah, that they were retaliated against. So it's gotten, in some places not better, but worse since everything kind of came to a head in 2019. Now things are starting to move in the right direction because what we've seen here is we had this hearing and this investigation that released a lot of the things that, quite frankly, were not a surprise to me. These are the things that we've been uncovering for a long time now. But what was a surprise to me is how quickly things have moved since then. Senator Ossoff calls, basically demands for inspections of every single housing unit, of every single military unit across the country. And then the Army secures that. And then, we were able to break that story. It was something that you saw right here first on News 12. We were able to break that story earlier this year. Then, boom, here we are in April, and it's already happening. In the world of government, I mean, I know that probably feels like a long time with military families, but in the world of government, that is lightning speed. Things don't happen that quickly. So I think the military families, and from what they're telling me, and from me covering this for as long as I've covered this, it takes more than just saying I'm outraged by this and I'm going to take this to Capitol Hill. There needs to be more, and for the first time ever, there's more. And the families are starting to see that. And so we've got the inspections that are happening right now, the first in the nation ones that are happening at Fort Gordon. They started last week, and those are continuing. We've got this oversight session that's happening, and Senator Ossoff is going to release a report, and this report is going to be details of what has happened since the hearing, what has happened, going forward. And I have not a clue what is in that report. So I am anxiously awaiting that, as are, a lot of the families, just to see, what has been found. And a lot of this meeting, corresponding with when these inspections start, it's not correlated because this is too soon to talk about any of the results of the inspections that are happening now at Fort Worth in this meeting today.
Yeah, and there's a lot of parts of what you just said that I kind of want to get into a little bit. First, though, I want to talk about the senator's involvement in all this, because you've obviously spoken with him a number of times in relation to this. You're heading up there now to sit in on that session tomorrow. What is it about this that's so important to him to want to help out these families, one, and then two, to continue to follow up on it, to be here personally for day 2 of those inspections? What message is he sending to these families as he tries to get them the help?
Well, first of all, when he held the hearing and when he released the report, he made a promise, and he said, I will stay on top of this. And I think this is him delivering on that promise, being there for the inspections. And two, it's just the right thing to do. This is a topic that Congress took up in 2019, and this is something that this isn't political, nor should it be. This isn't something that should be labeled, something a Democrat does or a Republican does. This is something that every American should care about, because this affects all of us. I mean, think about it. If you are one of the best and brightest in cybersecurity, and you have to deal with all of this, are you going to want to enlist in the Army? No, you're going to be attracted to Google or Amazon or somewhere in Silicon Valley. You're going to, the cyber world exists beyond cybersecurity, and if we want to continue to have our best and brightest defending our country, we need to make sure that everything is squared away on the home front to make sure their families are safe. And that's another thing too. These families are not asking for too much. They're not asking for, luxury accommodations. They're just asking for their home to be safe. They're just asking for their kids not to be sick. And I can't even believe that that's a question they have to ask. There was one of the families that we interviewed during the past year. She had 2 small kids, and when she was first arrived here, and it was one of her first appointments with the pediatrician, one of the first questions when she said, "Oh, we just came to Fort Gordon, we lived on post," the pediatrician immediately, she said, rapid fire, started following up with all these questions about breathing problems, are they around lead? And it was just a whole bunch of really overwhelming questions. And she said, whoa. And he said, yeah, I have to ask these questions. We live on post, right? Like, it's such a common thing. It's become such a common thing in the medical community that she said her pediatrician asked her about it. And that was just kind of heartbreaking. Like, it shouldn't be a thing.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a thing.
Yeah, and I think one thing that sticks out to me a lot here too is you tried to get Balfour Beatty to sit down with you for upwards of 10 years. They sit down with you in 2021, I believe it was, right around this
Mm-hmm.
time, 2 years
Yeah.
ago. And I feel like what we heard in that interview and what we've seen since have not lined up. Can you kind of put that in perspective? Give us a little more on that, whether you feel the same way, because again, you've been far more involved in this than anybody. But from the outside looking in, it just seems like they talked a lot about transparency, and they're not showing up to this session. Those are the kind of the two things that I'm seeing. What are you seeing?
I was so disappointed, or I have been so disappointed in just how things have gone since then. When they first agreed to an interview, I I was so excited because we couldn't find anywhere where Rick Taylor had done an interview with any other TV station. And so we thought, this is great. Finally we're going to sit down and be able to ask him questions. And also the way it happened was really encouraging too. The Army and Balfour Beatty have always kind of been like, butting heads. It's always like an us versus them mentality. And they always have been in this partnership, but it never really felt like a partnership, especially covering it. It was always, when I talked to Balfour Beatty, it would be us and them. So when Colonel Shaw picked, he was the garrison commander prior to the new one we have now at Fort Gordon, but he arranged a sit-down interview, and Rick Taylor was in Pennsylvania. It was during the pandemic, but he arranged, and I was in person with Colonel Peck, and Rick Taylor was in Pennsylvania. And so, first of all, the fact that Rick Taylor and Colonel Pick sat down to talk, the three of us talked together, was huge, because it, for so many years, like I mentioned, it was an us versus them, and there was like this wall between them, where that they were two islands. This felt like they were together, like this united team, that they were really in this partnership. And even Colonel Pick described it as a marriage, like, we are married, whether we like it or not, we are married, and we're going to make this marriage work. So even before we all kind of sat down for that interview, just the whole tone of it felt really hopeful, because it was for the first time I saw these two agencies. Here's this private company and the Army, who always seemed kind of at odds throughout all of this, especially since 2019, when all of this kind of came to a head. And then, Balfour Beatty was accused of fraud against the government. So, it was awkward, right? So having them together was like, maybe this is the beginning of healing. Maybe this is the beginning of them working together. And the only way that this is going to work is if everybody works together. And Rick Taylor said, and he's the guy in charge of Balfour Beatty communities, of all the houses of all their military communities. So the buck stops with him. He is the guy when Congress needed someone to testify. He is the guy for Balfour Beatty to testify. So he is the guy. He is the guy to talk to, right? So I felt very hopeful. And then he went even further to say, you know what, we have not been as transparent as we should have been, as we could have been. And I think we need to be more transparent going forward. Great. I mean, that's all anybody wants, is just transparency. And then, how do we fix this? Like, we all recognize there's a problem. Balfour Beatty does not even, back then, I mean, when they were testifying, they were a little more reluctant to admit any fault. But back then it was like, look, this is a problem. How do we fix this? Let's work together to fix this. And now it almost feels like they're kind of pulling back from that. And that's highly disappointing. Here's the thing. We are all rooting for Balfour Beatty. Like, we want Balfour Beatty to succeed, because Balfour Beatty's success means that the military families have a great place to live. This isn't about gotcha Balfour Beatty, or anyone's against Balfour Beatty. Balfour Beatty's, I'm a cheerleader for Balfour Beatty. The problem is, I've just seen them let the families down for so many years now, that it is hard to cheer for them. And it is hard when, I've been told I'm going to be transparent now, and then they they're not transparent. Or, I'm sitting in the room in Washington, D.C. with them, like Rick Taylor. I talked to him virtually. Here he is face to face with me, and he didn't want to say anything. He didn't want to talk to me. So, like, that's where it feels where, I'm almost naive now if 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 I keep listening, but
Mm-hmm.
I want to believe in the best in people. I always believe in the best in people, but fool me once, you know, shame on me. No, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. It's kind of gotten to that. But at the end of the day, again, we all succeed if Balfour Beatty succeeds.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a big thing. Is like we were saying earlier, this isn't a gotcha investigation on Balfour Beatty. This is just a, hey, let's make sure our servicemen and women have
Right.
places that they can live and not worry about their kids getting sick, or that they can go off to be stationed wherever for 8, 12 months and not have to worry what their family's doing with back home where they should be the safest. So we have these inspections going on right now. They've got, let's see, we're about a week in. We've got roughly about 3 weeks left. When these inspections got announced, we know government and they can kind of move slowly. Although you said this feels like a quick moving process, but when they announced the inspections, Balfour Beatty kind of gets this heads up of like, hey, they're coming. Maybe there's time to fix things. But from what we've seen, the damage and the issues are so vast and so serious. Do you think they'd be able to hide things enough that when the inspections come through, they kind of get swept under the rug? Or do you think if there's something, they'll find it?
Um, my personal opinion, and this is, it's an educated opinion covering this for a long time. I don't believe that they will be able. These aren't the band-aids that I've been told they've been placing on things for all these years. For example, I've had multiple families not just tell me, but show me in pictures that they've sent where the contractors have painted over things that they thought were mold. And you can peel the paint and then see the mold under. But mold eventually comes through the paint anyway. I've talked to contractors, several contractors, who have told me that they were told to just paint over it. I've talked to contractors who painted over vents to cover up vents. I've talked to contractors who have just stacked linoleum on linoleum on linoleum on linoleum floors to cover up problems with the floors. There's plumbing problems. There are issues where, there's a neighborhood that notoriously has plumbing. If one house backs up, it backs up into the next house. There are homes, they call them legacy homes. It's just a nice way of saying they're old, but they were built in the 50s and the 60s, and they were built using old housing codes. And some of them the codes don't stand for what our current housing codes are, and some of the upgrades are they're not quick fixes, and I don't believe that they would be able to rip everything out in the time that they knew inspections were coming, and bring them up to speed. But let's, for the sake of discussion, say that they could, that they did, that in the middle of the night they came in and they ripped everything down and they built it up and they fixed it. Great. If that's what it took, it shouldn't have taken that. But if that's what it took, awesome. Because at the end of the day, the goal is the same. So it's not like this is a criminal inspection and they're trying to catch Balfour Beatty in the act. What they're doing with these inspections is they're trying to get a good idea of where are we. Nobody really knows, because Balfour Beatty is a private company, and whenever there's been an issue, Balfour Beatty inspects itself. And again, let me remind you, this is a company convicted of fraud. So it's fair to say we haven't exactly had a clear picture of just what's wrong. So asking somebody who is an independent contractor, someone from the Army, a third party, to come in and look at this, we're going to have a much better idea of what we're dealing with. And I think it's easier to make a game plan and know what we're looking at, and do we need to knock down and start over? Is there anything salvageable? Are the bones good? Are the bones bad? We don't know. And this is a good way to figure out and then go from there. And those who can make these decisions, those who set the budgets, those who, make Congress, you name it, are going to have a plethora of information. And Nick, you know that information is power. And you can't make decisions if you don't have information. So this information is going to be valuable, and it's really the first time we've ever had.
Yeah, I was gonna. That was kind of what I wanted to get into next. Was we don't really know how big this is because we don't know how many families and how many units are involved. I mean, all the people you've spoken to over the years, how many people have you had cancel on you for every one person who's actually talked to you? Or how many people have said they don't want to talk to you for every one person who's actually gotten on camera or talked to you on the phone?
I couldn't even begin to quantify that. And, you know, to this day, people will cancel, and it's just because they're worried. And it's sad too, because there was also a fear, and that fear isn't as great as it today as it was, you know, even 5 years ago. But there was a fear of, even among the people in the neighborhood, where if you speak out, you know, everyone else in the neighborhood, they're worried that, you know, you're going to be an outcast, that, you know, people in the neighborhood are going to say, oh, you're whining, oh. And there are people, there's a fear that you're not going to be believed because, you know, mold affects everybody differently. But then on top of that, there are people who are afraid for the job. And then, you know, then they're mad that, you know, if a landlord is mad at you, then are you going to pay the price that way? Because these landlords can also fine you for things. And there were several families who would have spoken up, and then they moved out, and then they would send me their move out inspection list, and they said nickel and dime to death, but it was like, you know, here's $50 for this, $50 for this. And they truly believed that because they spoke out about their living conditions, that then they had to pay, you know, they didn't get any of their security deposit back. So even when there's not, you know, something tangible with their job or tangible with, like, they still feel like they had to pay in some way if they spoke up. And I can't tell you over the years where someone would call, especially after we've aired a story on the housing conditions at Fort Worth. We would call, and then someone would be on the other line and just be quiet for a minute. And I'd say, "Are you calling from Fort Worth?" The person would be like, "Yes," or this still happens. "Hey, I want to talk to you about my friend. My friend lives at Fort Worth," and they would, you know, go through a lot, and then after building some trust, or I've talked to them for, you know, a week or two, they would say, "Oh, actually, it's not my friend, it's me." And to this day. And so I really commend the men and women who are speaking up about this. They shouldn't have to be fearful if, you know, speaking up is going to help them, but it just kind of got to be, you know, a situation where they felt bullied into silence.
Yeah, and then not only or is that not only that, but you also have the fact that we don't know how many other installations across the country are dealing with this. We're kind of step one in a very long process. Again, Balfour Beatty has more than 50 installations across the country they do housing for. And we have, what is it, 1,700 units on Fort Gordon?
Mm-hmm.
So 1,700 times 50, quick math, I don't know, 8,000? No,
it's
80,000?
Yeah, it's a
something
lot.
like that.
It's a lot.
So there could be a lot more than this.
Yeah, and it's overwhelming, and you know, it could be kind of spitting in the ocean to fix one house, but it's something that needs to be kind of chipped away at. I mean, we can't afford not to do this. First of all, it's just the right thing to do. I mean, these are human beings. Like, we have got to be good people and protect our military. But second of all, you know, it just it hurts the mission of the soldiers to be stressed out and worried about this. Wherever you can find it in your heart to care about this, either, you know, you just care about people, or you care about our nation's defense, or you care about both. I mean, we should care about all of this. You don't need to have a family member or a loved one in the military to have this be a priority. It shouldn't be that way. I don't know anyone in the military. Like, I don't have a family member in the military. People say, like, "Oh, is that?" You know, someone has asked me that before. You know, do you have a family? No. It's just the right thing to do.
Yeah. And so as we have this meeting tomorrow morning, I guess it's kind of, you know, hope for the best, expect the worst. What are you hoping to hear tomorrow or to see tomorrow? I know it's kind of tough when Balfour Beatty's not there, because it feels like, everybody in there is kind of on the same side. They're kind of on the same team, whereas Balfour Beatty seems to have a lot of the ability to give a lot of answers that the other entities there can't provide. But what are you expecting or hoping to hear out of tomorrow's meeting?
Well, if we hear bad things, I don't think that that is necessarily a bad thing. And here's why. For so long, so many people had to speak up and raise their hand and jump up and down and say, this has made me sick. This home has made me ill. But now that this is starting to be an investigation where so many more people are involved, that there was this hearing, this very public hearing. Senator Ossoff was just at Fort Gordon last week and held a town hall meeting with 40 families. He keeps in touch with families. We have families that are testifying. So what this means is a lot of this stuff is coming to light. So the more that people who have the power and authority to do something about it hear about it, the better. Because then it doesn't become like, that just happened to Captain Cho and his family, or that this needs to become as we need to put as many bases as possible to the problem, because that way it doesn't, this isn't an isolated incident. So I don't necessarily think, hearing that so many more bad things have happened since the hearing is a bad thing. I mean, it's a terrible thing and it never should happen, but it's never a bad thing when things come to light. So I think that's important to remember. And two, the fact that these things are coming to light in a room with the people who have power and the people who can what we haven't talked about yet is obviously Balfour Beatty pleaded guilty to defrauding U.S. government a while back, but the Department of Justice could still at any time look at this, and if there is any criminal activity, they could also, take a look and perhaps form a case as well. So it's not off the table that could happen. Do I know if that's going to happen? No, because I don't know what's in this investigation, but it's what's happened before when some of this stuff has come to light. So I think it's important that all of this stuff is documented, that it's not just, this thing where, everybody knows military housing is bad. Well, no, it shouldn't be, first of all. And second of all, it should be documented and have some sort of official paper trail so that the Rachel Jacobsons of the Army can take a look at it, and that the Senator Ossoffs can hold a hearing, and that, our congressmen can look at it, the Department of Justice can look at it. So yeah. I think the fact that all of this is being reported and the families are speaking up is very important, because this is happening at a bigger rate than in the past. So we've got this happening, and then of course the inspections are happening too, where we'll have much more data piggybacking off of this. It's only going to be a good thing, because if this continued to stay in the dark and it's just a couple of families speaking up every now and then, that hasn't worked. We're still where we are. Mm-hmm. The problem is still prevalent. There are still children getting sick. So obviously what happened hasn't worked, but I think we're trying new things, and Senator Ossoff, of course, leading that charge is moving things forward. I've seen more in the last 2 years than I have seen in the last 12 years. So I'm hopeful that things are changing, and they may have to.
Yeah, and I do want to reiterate, I think you said this earlier, but just for people listening, maybe you're confused, the inspections and this meeting tomorrow are not directly related. So the inspections, we're expecting, to hear whatever comes out of those later. The meeting tomorrow has nothing to do with those. So this is not the end of the story by any means. But Meredith, and maybe you could talk to this a little bit more too, is I don't know that these families realize how big this is, or maybe they didn't and they're starting to now, because earlier in our other morning talk, I think you had said Captain Cho was maybe told that the old houses had problems, but not the officer houses where he was going to be living. And I think you had said that there was another woman who heard Captain Cho's testimony at the hearing last year and said, oh my goodness, that's also happening to me and my kids. So do you think that maybe the families don't even realize how big it is, and maybe they think or have thought that their incident was isolated?
Yeah, and it's interesting to see, how these families are finding each other. Social media has been a big help with that. The woman you were just talking about, her name is Liz. They moved out of their house, but before she did an anecdotal survey, a little poll she sent out on Facebook of just her neighborhood, and she was like, I just want to find out if I'm alone. Like, I mean, I know Captain Joe said all this stuff, and that's what made me move when I read the report, and I feel like a lot of the same things that are happening to me were happening to his daughter. But she said, is anybody else having a rash? Is anybody else having this? And she got a lot of responses, and we covered that in one of our stories. And she said that people were even adding things to her list of symptoms. Like, she never had nosebleeds, but a lot of families were saying, yeah, we've had nosebleeds. And so she said that, like, social media has been a big help too, because people are finding each other. People move in and out of these houses. So, I mean, you can be on a street with someone and someone can move in and out of the houses all around you. You don't really get a good history of the house. And that actually was part of the Tenant Bill of Rights. When the Tenant Bill of Rights was established, you were supposed to get a 10-year history of all the maintenance requests of the house that you live in. But we spoke with one woman who, in one of our past stories, her name is Haley. She and her husband requested from Fort Gordon to get a number of those requests, of those maintenance records, and they were refused. They're like, no, we can't give them to you. But by law, they should have had them, because that's part of the patient, that's part of the Tenant Bill of Rights. So, yeah, anyway, there's so much frustration. There is so much frustration in so many of the families, and I keep in touch with so many of them. And a lot of them are worried that problems that they didn't see in the moment with their kids may show up later.
Yeah, and it's sometimes we can kind of become, I guess, desensitized to it a little bit, because we've heard housing issues so many times, especially recently with this story. But I kind of wanted to hammer the point home that this isn't just like, a cracked window, or, as you mentioned earlier, some broken blinds. I mean, this is mold. This is plumbing issues. We've seen dirty water in bathtubs, and this is stuff I wouldn't live in. This is stuff I'm sure you wouldn't live in. If I walked into an apartment complex and saw this on a tour, I wouldn't sign a lease there. And this is the stuff that we're having our service men and women, the people who are defending our country and our freedom, are living in. That's backwards. And I think, we talked about it earlier. You have to commend the senator for his work in this and his diligence and staying on it, because really at the end of the day, it's unacceptable. That's really the only way we can describe this, is it's unacceptable what these servicemen and women are living through.
It has made me beyond frustrated. I don't understand, Nick, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't understand why we're still talking about it. I don't understand why in 2019 this wasn't nipped in the bud. Because what is even more mind-blowing to me is that the executives at Balfour Beatty, this private company, the ones who at the top are still there. Rick Taylor's still there, and there is this burning question that this has bothered me. This has really bothered me. When he was testifying at the hearing last year, he said, we didn't know. When he was questioned about the fraud, he's like, well, we didn't know. Like, we didn't know that was going on. And Senator Ossoff says, okay, so you didn't know. He was like, no, so we didn't know. So you have this person who's over all of the housing, and he claims he didn't know, but then he obviously doesn't know what's going on in his own company. So, like, what is it? Either you don't know what's going on, or there's fraud, and neither one of those are good. Neither one of those are good. I don't know about you, but I would have lost my job a long time ago, and I don't understand how this problem continues to exist with the same people at the top at Balfour Beatty still in those same positions. It's like, of course nothing's going to change if you're dealing with the same people.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think a lot of us would have lost our jobs by now.
It's a fair question. It's a fair question, and it's a fair debate.
Well, let me ask you, in the years you've been covering this, how often or how many people, I guess, have been in charge of Balfour Beatty, or how often has leadership changed, if at all, in the 12 plus years?
Rick Taylor's been pretty much the one in charge. So, I mean,
And then on the Army side, do you know how many commanders there have been?
the garrison commanders, so many garrison commanders, but that's also pretty complicated because they're in charge, and there's also this company that, I mean, they can't fire the company. The company is on a 50-year contract. So, I mean, there's a lot. There's some things that sound more simple than they are with this, which is one of the reasons why I think Colonel Pick said, we're in a marriage. We've got to make this work.
Yeah. Well, I guess,
and he was trying. It's a very complicated relationship.
It is, and it's one that, unfortunately, is hurting our military families at the end of the day.
Because at the end of the day, the problem is simple. It's a simple problem.
Yep. And you talked about the two outcomes. Either there's fraud or he doesn't know what's going on. And you've got two routes that lead to the same destination, and that is hurting military families here at Fort Gordon. And that's not an outcome that's good for anybody. And like you talked about, we want the best and brightest out there, but if they're not safe and they're not protected here, they'll just go do similar jobs elsewhere, especially we're talking about the growth of cyber, especially here in Augusta. So it is frustrating. I obviously have not looked into this as much as you have over the years, but in the small amount of time that I've been in tune with this, it's getting me more and more frustrated. But hopefully some good comes out of this session tomorrow. Hopefully we start to see that transparency and that accountability with Balfour Beatty. We'll hold our breath on that. And hopefully our military families get some treatment that they deserve, because that's who it comes down to at the end of the day.
That is the ultimate goal.
So, Meredith, as always, we appreciate the time. How far away are you guys from D.C.?
We are, let's see, we're about 48 miles.
Okay.
Till a little over an hour, I guess.
There you go. Gare, holding up nicely?
Gary.
Good. All right, Meredith, we appreciate the
update. We've been going since 4 a.m.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You guys have got to be pretty close to there at this point. Coming up on noon here. But yeah, good deal. Meredith, thank you as always. We will check in with you probably tomorrow as we hear more about the meeting. Again, Meredith's going to be there at that meeting, so she'll have all the updates for us coming up here tomorrow. We will be sure to keep you guys updated with anything that happens up there in Washington. So, Meredith, thanks.
All right.
Meredith Anderson, live there somewhere on I-95, giving us the update on a story she's been following now for, I think, 12 years. I think I went back and saw a story from 2011 on Balfour Beatty, so it's been a long time coming, and hopefully some good comes out of this meeting tomorrow and we see some more steps going in the right direction moving forward. So that is going to do it for the News 12 Now desk for today. Thanks a whole lot for tuning in. We have got the TV side of things coming up here in about 10 minutes now, so if you want to head on over to News 12 at midday, Zaina and Tim will have the latest for you over there. We will be back here tomorrow morning for some top headlines here at News 12 Now. Have a good one.